Hello and welcome. I'm Ahmed Musa, Senior Programs Manager at the Columbia Global Center in Amman. Thank you for being with us for today's webinar on Syria's transition and the regional power and realignments. Our event today will investigate recent developments in Syria and how they are reshaping the political landscape of the wider Middle East as regional actors reassess their strategies and alliances in light of the shifting balance of power. We're pleased to host a distinguished panel who will help us unpack the drivers behind this transition and what it signals for the region's future. They will delve into the evolving dynamics following the fall of al-Assad's regime and the rise of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Themes that our distinguished speakers will discuss today include the emergence and governance trajectory of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the evolving political alliances and regional power plays, as well as the broader geopolitical implications. This is the third webinar of our Shifting Paradigm series, which addresses the complex and evolving landscape of international relations, focusing on how global power structures are changing and what that means for stability, security, and cooperation worldwide. The discussions bring together experts in political science, economics, international relations, history, and security studies to present a multidisciplinary perspective on the topic. It is co-organized by the Columbia Global Centers in Istanbul and Amman and the Committee on Global Thought at Columbia University. Moderating today's discussion is Professor Adam Tooze, the Catherine and Shelby Cullum Davis Professor of History, Chair of the Committee on Global Thought, and the Director of the European Institute at Columbia University. From a start in modern German history with a special focus on the history of economics and economic history, Adam's interests have widened to take in a range of themes in political, intellectual, and military history across a canvas stretching from Europe across the Atlantic. Before joining Columbia in 2015, Adam had held several appointments, including the Barton M. Biggs Professorship at Yale University, where he succeeded Paul Kennedy as Director of International Security Studies, as well as teaching at the University of Cambridge, serving as Reader in Modern History and Bernie Hart Fellow in History at Jesus College. Adam, he'll be joined by three experts. Ibrahim al-Asil is a political scientist and Middle East scholar specializing in geopolitics, state building, and regional security. He is a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C., and a professorial lecturer at George Washington University. With practical expertise in conflict resolution, regional Track 2 dialogues, and grassroots movement, al-Asil has held fellowships at institutions such as Harvard University's Center for Public Leadership and the Orient Research Center in Dubai. He has also served on the boards including the Harvard Alab Alumni Association, the Syrian Nonviolence Movement, and strategic advisory groups. Our second distinguished speaker is Reem Ma'allaf, is a Syrian-born writer, a policy and diplomacy advisor, and a communication strategist. Reem is the author of the forthcoming book, It Started in Damascus, How the Long Syrian Revolution Reshaped Our World, published by Hearst Publishers in autumn of 2025. A former Associate Fellow at Chatham House, she has researched, spoken, and written about Syria, the region, and international affairs for 2 decades. While remaining politically independent, she is committed to supporting Syria's transition to a democratic and pluralistic state and is a board member of the renowned Syrian civil society organization The Day After. She is also on the advisory council of the Washington, D.C.-based Middle East Institute Syria program. Our last speaker for today is Aydin Selcin, is a former Turkish diplomat and an experienced commentator focusing on Syria and Iraq. He joined the Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1992 and served in various diplomatic posts, including Algiers, Stockholm, Paris, Baghdad, and Washington, D.C. From 2010 to 2013, he served as Turkey's first consul general in Erbil, Iraq. Following his departure from in 2013, he worked as a political advisor at Genel Energy. Since 2015, he has been working independently, primarily writing and commenting on issues related to Iraq and Syria. He's a regular columnist for Gazette du Var and hosts programs on Mediascope TV, and RTTV. Together, the panel will offer critical insights into why Syria's trajectory matters, not just for its own future, but for the strategic direction of the region as a whole. There will be time for questions from the audience after the discussion, so please do share yours using the Q&A box below. We appreciate your engagement, and we're looking forward to a timely and thought-provoking conversation. With that, I'll hand it over to Adam to lead today's event. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmad. It's a great pleasure to be here as chair of the Committee of Global Thought in Columbia University in New York. It's been a real privilege to collaborate with the Columbia Global Centers in Amman and in Istanbul. I'd like to express my gratitude to them for putting together another fabulous panel, the third in our series, which it's been my privilege and really great pleasure to chair. We couldn't have picked a more, I think, urgent topic for discussion than Syria. I've long been of the view that, and this was before the drama of the winter, that this is the great underreported story of the modern world. And now I think we have extra layers of complexity. We're all racing, I think, to understand the dynamism of change. And I want to start with you, Reem, because you're in the fortunate, but also in some ways, I imagine, agonizing position of finishing a book into the midst of this turmoil, what perhaps 12 months ago appeared to be a kind of frozen impasse, though that may be a superficial impression. I know that people at the time thought it was, of a conflict that didn't appear to be capable of immediate resolution. The day after was never going to arrive. Now, all of a sudden, we're there. And I think it will be fascinating to hear just how you've coped with that. Well, presumably you had to rewrite the ending. How did you do that, and what are you going to say? Looking at the current developments against the backdrop of events since 2011, how do we put them in perspective, and what is the angle? What are the threads that you see that could guide us in trying to understand the current moment and its possibilities, but perhaps also its dangers?
Thank you, Adam. Indeed, as you know, I was nearly finished with my book when the regime fell in December of 2024. I had 2 chapters left. They were supposed to be delivered to my publisher as agreed in January, and we were going to publication in autumn, and we still are. The idea was always to discuss and to convince the world that Syria is not over. And that's why I love the title that we're discussing today, Syria's Transition, because I argue throughout this book that there was a different kind of transition that people had accepted, and different powers in the region had fallen into this false security that it was over, that it was done, that all these years brought nothing, that we are dealing with a fait accompli, that the Assad regime is here to stay. The Russians and the Iranians are the dominating powers in the region. And well, what can we do? And we wring our hands and we say, let's see how we can ease Syrians back into this new status quo. I was in the, while this was happening in 2023, I was arguing with publishers and agents that no, it's not over. There are things happening. And the reason things were happening, I explained to them, was because of this surreal situation that we had in Idlib, where a lot of groups were, some in hiding, but some very openly governing and trying to plan ahead. And a lot of civil society, Syrian civil society groups and NGOs were already very familiar, including our own NGO. We were familiar with how, at the time, Jolani and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham were governing, were establishing themselves as people who knew how to, take back control of what was happening. We were also talking about over half the Syrian population outside of its homes, some 6 million or more refugees in the neighboring countries, and I know we will come to that, and some 6 to 7 million IDPs in Syria. So I think all these things were beginning to be put to the side, while Arab countries, we have to be very clear about that. It is the Arab countries that began the road to normalization with Assad, because they thought nothing more could be done. And this happened at the same time as, Iran got busy in Lebanon, and as Russia got busy in Ukraine for all the wrong reasons, both of them. So this normalcy, these years of quiet, I think lulled all these powers into this false security that Assad was the only thing we had. And we did not focus on what was happening, not just in Idlib, but also in the civil society rumble that was happening all over the world, in Syria, in the region, over the world, that this was not over. And this is why I think when I come back to my book, that when this happened, when the regime fell, and I had the last 2 chapters to write, I didn't need to change a single word in the first 14 chapters, but the last chapter changed completely, because where I was going to argue that this is where we are today and these are the dangers or the opportunities for Syrians, and you, the world, to decide where you stand, this is where I think I was able to shift very quickly and explain how it happened and why. So it ended up explaining, and that's what we need today to do, to understand how we got today to where we are today, because it didn't even just start in 2011, it started before that.
Reem, that's such a great start opener. We will be coming back, I think, to the internal politics of Syria's situation in a minute. But Aydin, in our pre-conversations, you gave us a very graphic impression of how shocking the events in Syria have been from the point of view of Ankara, from the point of view of Turkey. You've had a ringside seat in these events over decades at this point. It will be great to get your angle on this from the Turkish-Kurdish side of the story.
Thank you, Adam. It's also a privilege for me to be part of this distinguished panel. And this time around, you used the word shocking. First time in our preparatory meeting, I had preferred euphoria. You had used elation, elated. So I was going to go for elated. And I think shocking is not proper, but I will pick from you the word elated, moreover. Ankara was, the feeling was over euphoria or elation in Ankara following the 12 days or so thunder run of Ahmed al-Shara and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and toppling of Bashar al-Assad. Looking from Ankara, Turkey and Israel actually also, although that wasn't perhaps said aloud, but Turkey and Israel were the clear winners, and Russia and Iran were the clear losers. And Saudi Arabia and Qatar appear to be the new, to bankroll the new heavy lifting, so to speak. Again, looking at the bilateral relations history, for the first time, perhaps a fully positive, a government with a fully positive approach is in place in Damascus. And also some parts, some members of the close confidants of Ahmed al-Shara, like the foreign minister, for example, are trained in Turkey. They speak Turkish, and there are others. Talking about that, that is about the decision-making, policy-making part. But also, we have to keep in mind that around 5 million Syrians are in Turkey, mostly in Istanbul, since perhaps a decade or so now. And although they constitute a big burden politically and economically, to give Turkish people credit, there are no violence against them, so on and so forth. But they can become also another advantage in bilateral relations. And lately, just 2 days ago, on Saturday, Ahmed al-Shara popped up again in Ankara, and he was received not only by the President of the Republic, Mr. Erdogan, but also the new special envoy for Syria of Mr. Trump, who is also at the same time with a dual hat, the new US ambassador in Ankara. That shows us, or that's another proof perhaps, that how Saudi Arabia's, Turkey's, and United States strategic interests align in a very original way this time around in Syria. The problems also are there. Perhaps we can get into that in the second round. The autonomous region of North and East Syria, the future of the SDF and the new peace process in Turkey, and we can talk about these matters perhaps in the next round.
Haydn, thank you so much. Sorry, forgive me for conflating euphoria with shock. I think this may be an American habit at this point. We're so used to being in a state of trauma at the hands of our administration that word trips off the tongue. Ibrahim, it would be great to get your impressions of the drama of the last 6 months. And Reem sees this as, in a sense, the confirmation of her broad read of the Syrian situation. Did it strike you in the same way?
Thanks, Adam, and great to be with you all. Thank you and also for your colleagues for having us. I totally agree with everything Reem said on the situation in Syria. And to talk a little bit about governance and what's happening inside Syria before we move also to the region and other dynamics. It's very important to realize that most state institutions in Syria collapsed. They went through very deep decay, not only during the civil war, but before, for decades, that the state institutions captured by the regime, and then how the Assad regime sacrificed the state institutions and sovereignty for the survival of the regime. So the state institutions in Syria, we lost them before even the collapse of the regime. Now, after the regime collapsed and Syria was technically left without any functioning state institutions, the new authorities, they inherited very weak institutions and fragmented structure in Syria. We have different and small Syrias, and they don't all talk to each other when we're talking about governance and functionality of the institutions. But how I would probably describe them, or what I would like to highlight when we talk about Ahmed al-Shara, al-Shaybani, and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, first, that they are not monolithic. HTS is not only one block. It's actually diverse parts of a wide coalition. And at the top of the pyramid, they are not ideological, what I would describe them, if I'm talking about al-Shara and al-Shaybani. Their statements, actually, if you compare it to decades of statements in Syria, they are the least ideological statements. But the deeper you go in the layers of governance, things change. And especially if you look at the Ministry of the Interior and the security, you would find that the leaders of the security and those appointed across Syria, they come from one color inside Syria, from one ideological color, because mainly that's the security structure that was within HTS, and those are the figures that Ahmed al-Shara trust inside Syria. And
more about that color. What are you, for our non-specialist audience, what is the particular coloration that we have?
That's a great question. And before I give my comment on that, I do want to highlight that we are still trying to understand that color.
Right,
because it's really fluid and it's changing. It's something new. Sometimes, we borrow some terms and labels from other contexts to describe what's going on. But it's also good to remember that we are still trying to figure out. So they are conservatives, they are Sunnis, they are men, they are mostly in their probably 30s and 40s. So you do see a certain group demographically and ideologically. But how that's being also translated into practice, it's still something evolving. And even during every day, you see that there is, for example, a statement or a decision by the government, and then there is a push by Syrians and many also circles. And then you see a change and the response to that. So it's still very moving and it's still shapeable, the moment. For where we would go. And this is not only about the HTS itself, but also about the pull and push with the Syrian society. And especially, Adam, if we also shed some light on why, even when we say Ahmed al-Shara transformed over the last decade or so, and we're still trying to understand what kind of transformation or where he is now. big part of why he transformed is the Syrian society and the Syrian civil society in Idlib. The pull and push between them in Idlib really shaped Ahmed al-Shara and his thinking. Sometimes they clashed, sometimes they conceded, sometimes they negotiated. And today, Ahmed al-Shara and HTS, they came on a wave, they came on a certain coalition of interests. But for them to rule, because they are mainly recalibrating for survival, they know they need to change that wave and change that base in society. And they are mixing that. That's why there is that color, but that color is changing. And there are other aspects that are being that they are getting into this new circle and new dynamics inside Syria.
Reem, that was fascinating. I'd love, Reem, to bring you back in because maybe you can help us flesh out this picture. So we have this image of a pragmatic top leadership, a civil society that pushes HTS one direction or the other. But then I'm also getting from Ibrahim the idea that lower down the HTS hierarchy in some of the power apparatuses, there might be a more rigid and more dogmatic kind of position. How do we think of that triangle, if it is a triangle, you know, working its way out?
It's, I would say, of course, agreeing and jumping onto what Ibrahim was saying, I would even add more angles to this. I don't know how far we can go. What
Give
kind
us
of
more
shape?
geometry. Yeah, let's have more corners to this.
Even more than a triangle, you know, we're reaching.
Yeah, I think we can have more than a triangle for Syria, I think.
Allow me to bring the Iranian factor in as also one of the reasons why I think there's a lot of different configurations to how Hayat Tahrir al-Sham has been not developing this. We've already covered very little of it, but how Syrian society overall has been reacting. So you have the people who are dead set against any idea of Islamists in power. Most people expected something different, but gave up after a while. But you have also people, I think this is a phenomenon that we must face, especially as Syrians, and look and see where the dangers are in that. And this is the people who felt abandoned. I would say the entire, most of the Syrian population felt abandoned. And then when push came to shove, everybody's commenting, oh yeah, you Islamists, you know, where's the democracy that you wanted? Well, people would tell you that's not what we want. But now that you mention it, what is wrong with these people? And this is, you know, the Syrian street responding. And what I'm hearing a lot of, and this might not mean a lot to members of our audience, but it's worth looking into, it is the counter transition from being a big stop on the Iranian axis that we haven't delved into yet, to repositioning Syria and the entire region with it into the Arab strength region. Saudi Arabia has only just entered the scene again after years of being, you know, pushing back and just letting things be. Saudi Arabia has taken a leading role right now in the facilitation of removing sanctions from Syria and in making Ahmed al-Shara acceptable to other leaders. So there's the Saudi angle, there's the pushing back of the Iran angle, and I'm going to bring to you the idea of Bani Umayyah, which you are hearing a lot these days in Syria. This dream of regaining what Syrians felt they lost all these years, between 55 years, 54 years of Assad regime, and more than that, 60 of Ba'ath. Before that, all the military coups. Before that, we had the French mandate. And before that, roughly 400 years of Ottoman rule. So there's this idea that I'm hearing a lot of coming into Syrian discourse, civil society discourse, which is to bring back the grandiose Syrians of the Umayyad times. And this is, I think, a danger for somebody who's looking at Syria. But it is a very heartfelt feeling in a lot of the society. And these are the people who are crazy about Ahmed al-Shara.
That's an astonishing, fascinating insight into a society which is so often represented as on its knees, in ruins, in tatters. I had no idea that there was this grandiloquent kind of vision. That's fascinating. But before we go to the wider geopolitics, which everyone has been hinting at and we have to get to, You in your opening comment were remarking on the giant refugee population of Syrians in Turkey, but also on the unsettled situation in the north of the country. You obviously have deep experience with the Kurdish question. This presumably is a key element in thinking about the future of Syria, as it is also presumably in thinking about the future of Iraq. It would be great to get your angle on this.
Well, thank you, Adam. We are not going to get into a history debate, of course, but both Republic of Turkey and Syria at a later date are offspring of Ottoman Empire, of course. But well, yes, the direct descendant is Republic of Turkey in a way, in a legal way, perhaps. But yes, there is a Turkish military presence inside Syria in two interconnected pockets, and then another pocket to the east of Euphrates. And the defense pact is in the works, as we understand, with Syria, in a way to legitimize or legalize, I don't know, the presence of these troops inside Syria. On the other hand, yes, as I indicated, both Turkey and Israel appear to be the winners, but also it's one of the problems for Ankara. So there is another deconfliction process is underway through the facilitation of Baku, of Azerbaijan. A kind of an understanding, I believe, is about to be reached, if not reached already, so that the two, the Israelis and the Turkish forces will not be shooting at each other. Yes, the Kurdish issue, different from, well, I was the first Turkey's first consul general in Erbil, and the opening of that consulate also was part of that opening process at the time, which ended in 2015. I resigned by 2013, but I served there for 3 years, and I was the point person to be in touch with the different Kurdish factions at that time, from Syria. So it's an issue. A peace process is underway. PKK is declared that they are going to disband themselves, but it's kind of a front-loaded approach because we do not follow this disarm, demobilize, reintegrate pattern, but we start directly with disbanding and handing over the weaponry to the Turkish armed forces or the Turkish intelligence services. And the problem for Ankara, for the east of Euphrates, was that the presence of YPG and YPJ, which the backbone of SDF, was seen as the direct extension of PKK in Syria. So now the demand from al-Shara is to take over, for example, the camps, the ISIS camps, Al-Hol, which is until now was in control of SDF, and also for the SDF to be part of the Syrian forces, but Syrian armed forces. But yes, we are in Anno Zero in Syria. We expect all the state institutions to come up. Time is too short. It can go either way. So it's not very realistic to expect, for example, the Syrian Kurds to disarm. And SDF also is half Arabic. There are not only the Kurds who are part of that. The other thing is, yes, Idlib pocket was protected by Turkish armed forces for years, following an understanding with the Russians, but neither Ahmed al-Shara nor HTS was controlled directly from Ankara. Perhaps Syrian National Army factions, yes, more to the north, but not the HTS. But still, the relations are definitely much better than from Hafez al-Assad or Bashar al-Assad later. So the issue now, yes, the security challenge, Israel, that is about to be solved, as I understand, but the SDF problem, that is going to, if you see it as a problem, that is going to linger on for a while, but the political changes in Turkey or the political approach may turn or may convert SDF from being a problem to be part of a big bang kind of a solution for the entirety of Syria.
Thank you so much. That's extremely illuminating. To have Azerbaijan put in the story as well complicates it further. And I do want to go to the geopolitics angle now, but I think I want to make sure that I understand Reem's early intervention correctly, because if I get you right, Reem, that the big push of your narrative, which is serving so usefully for us in organizing our thoughts, is that the illusion that we had maybe 2 years ago that Syria was a done deal and it had been decided essentially by external forces, Russian and Iranian intervention, in favor of the maintenance of the Assad regime, that this was an illusion, right? That actually it's domestic forces that in the end produced an unstable situation such that it could tip as dramatically as it did. And we are not attributing, are we, the sudden collapse of Assad's regime and the surge to power of the HTS to an external power play in the first instance. So do I not have that right? And if it's the case that we're playing domestic forces and we're giving priority to domestic forces in the unleashing of this sudden chain of events, then I guess that means that we read the geopolitics as largely reactive. In other words, the Russians, the Iranians, the Americans, everyone else has to respond to the dynamism of change within Syria. Is that the right way of thinking? Have I got the right end of the stick here?
I think you did, and I think my colleagues, will also give their opinion on that. I think it's a concurrence of factors. One is that indeed it was not enough that when the Iranians and the Russians were busy with something else, they could not continue to prop up Assad, and others saw an opportunity. From everything we've heard, Ahmed Shara was very eager to begin this, reconquering parts of Syria, not imagining he would get to Damascus so quickly. And I think another very important point is the army, Assad's army did not fight.
Yes.
Nobody saw that coming. So when at the time we thought, oh my God, the Russians are going to come and bomb, and the Iranians are coming, and all the army, and I personally thought, and many of my colleagues did, that Homs would be a very bloody battle, because it is a very important point on the Syrian map where all the Iranian arms and weapons go to Lebanon, and that did not happen. So there are so many factors to take into consideration, but certainly yes, this false sense of security that all the supporters of Assad said, okay, this is okay, now let's move on. How do we move on? Other people had different things in mind. And one last point, if you allow me, a lot of the young soldiers, the fighters, let's call them, the young fighters that came with Shara and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, not the foreign ones who are very ideologically driven, the young ones, they were the young Syrians who had become refugees, who were forcibly displaced from their homes. A lot of them came back as fighters in Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. They feel they have a stake in that. And I think that did a lot for the stamina and the heartfelt desire to be part of Syria.
Thank you so much, Reem. If I might turn to Ibrahim, we already have an excellent question that leads on. This is by Andrew Collingwood in the Q&A. If Turkey and Israel are the winners, Iran and Russia are the losers, and the re-emerging players are the Saudis and the other Gulf states, which I think seems to summarize our view up to this point, where does Jordan sit in all of this? Is Andrew's question. Is the premise of his question correct, that is the right way to think about the configuration of power here? And how do you see Jordan's position?
I think what happened in Syria, and we can also draw that from the Jordanian reaction, that the Jordanian engaged very quickly, even though usually the Jordanian diplomacy is very cautious about big changes in geopolitics. They are not the ones usually who jump in quickly. They wait and see and assess. When the Assad regime fell, it was one of the very early actors that went in and offered support. And I think that the Jordanian calculations were that first, their priority when they had to deal with Assad in the last few years was the drug smuggling, weapon smuggling, Captagon trading across the borders, which really threatened the Jordanian national security. Number two, the issues of refugees. They do want to stabilize Syria because they want the refugees ultimately to go back from Jordan to Syria. And third, because they understood the alternative, that we could actually face a total collapse and fragmentation inside Syria. They looked at the new leadership, and while it's not ideal, it's also strong leadership. And this is a dilemma because in post-conflict, we usually seek democratic, we do want like reformative leadership. But actually, the threat in many conflicts that you don't find strong leadership post-conflicts, and that's why countries and places go into a deep and long period of fragmentation. In Syria, there was strong leadership, and clearly the Jordanians wanted to engage because they do want to stabilize and they do want to shape the moment inside Syria. And I still think Jordan has a very crucial role to play in the future, including training the new security and military apparatus inside Syria. Jordan has strong state institutions in the region, especially if you compare it to currently to Syria and Lebanon. So Jordan is somewhere that Syria could lean on, and they could offer so much. To the bigger picture, I think this is a great moment for two middle powers in the region, Saudi Arabia and Turkey. And I do see some maturity in the approach towards Syria. If you compare it to where it was 13 or 14 years ago, where Turkey wanted to become a hegemon after the rise of Muslim brotherhoods across the region and in Egypt and in other places. Also, Saudi Arabia at some point was funding different militias. They were like inter-Gulf competition. Today, the region is totally at a different point. You do see the Saudis and the Turks. There is a competition, but not to become a full hegemon in the region. But like over interest is more constructive. And that's realization that Syria is a space that either becomes a regional balancer or a regional battleground. And today the region cannot afford Syria becoming another battleground. Finally, there is another regional power that didn't seem to be at that level of maturity currently of sharing and understanding, which was Israel. And we've seen like the buffer zone and the buffer zone of the buffer zone and the aerial bombardment and the strikes and the lack of trust. That changed a little bit recently. I think the Turks played a role, the Saudis played a role, the Emiratis played a huge role. There were also the talks in Azerbaijan. Different regional players are trying to open channels, at least for de-escalation and non-aggression. That there is no point of having any sort of Syrian Israeli war, for at least Israel not to become spoiler, because at some point it was very interesting that the Iranian interests and the Israeli interests converged in Syria in keeping Syria fragmented and weak. I hope the Israelis are moving away from that goal, the unspoken, the silent goal, even though actually Smotrich was clear about it. But to see that there is an opportunity to stabilize Syria, no regional power will get everything they want, but also to avoid a huge geopolitical risk of having Syria collapse again and go into another cycle of violence or cycle of civil war.
Thank you so much for that. That was fascinating. I want in a minute to go to the question of peace building initiatives and turn to Aydin with that question. But before we go there, if I may, I want to come back to Reem, because I'm quite, I have to say, my head's quite turned by the constructive, upbeat tone of this conversation, this idea that, we've moved on in our thinking about Syria. Once upon a time, we were playing perversely for regional hegemony. We're not doing that anymore. We don't want Syria to be a battlefield. But after all, this is a society in ruins. If you look from an economic point of view, which is my personal angle on these issues, Syria is a disaster of absolutely extraordinary proportions. The casualties are horrific. The vast displacement of people, Reem, that you alluded to is amongst the worst in modern history, proportionally. How does a society, as we are thinking in these very constructive, upbeat terms about political consolidation and some geopolitical learning that may have gone on, how, Reem, do you see Syrian society, Syrian people coming to terms simply with the horror, the damage, which to a large extent they still live amongst, right? I mean, their strategies of survival up to last year, certainly, where there were acute shortages of water, acute shortages of electricity, are really existential strategies of survival.
Indeed, and there still are huge shortages because, you know, the sanctions have only just been lifted.
Only just lifted, right? Yeah.
Yes, and I think a lot of people were expecting them to be lifted very slowly and gradually over a long period of time. Something changed massively with the visit of President Trump to Saudi Arabia. And I think it brought a lot of surprises to a lot of Syrians. So I believe that the first imperative was to remove the sanctions on the banking sector in Syria. And that is how most Syrians, I believe, Syrian civil society has always understood that this is, you know, the first big obstacle to remove because nothing can come in. The first step is going to be aid. It's going to be, I believe, the Saudis, the Qataris, the Emiratis, who are going to, you know, pay salaries of civil servants, who are going to provide big ships with that can provide electricity. The water is not being pumped right now because the electricity is so weak, the power is so weak that they can't. So we are really talking about very basic level of needs. The second step, I believe, will be the reconstruction, and I think there's a lot of good hopes coming from our neighbors, beginning with Turkey. There have been a lot of meetings, as I understand it, with the authorities in Damascus about how and where to begin, because until some basic reconstruction is done, the refugees cannot come back and the displaced people cannot come back. And that ties us in, by the way, to the idea of, you know, we all wanted a democracy, we wanted, you know, people to participate. How can you even have a concept of elections when over half of the Syrian population is unable to participate? So I think it makes sense, and that bought Shara and the authorities some time, because it is a logical thing to do that. You have to wait. We need a census, we need other things. So for the economy, I think that we have no choice but to consider the beginnings as aid after the sanctions are lifted, and to reconsider you know, there's a huge amount of patience that has surprised a lot of us, and how Syrians in the big areas that have been destroyed have been willing to give this new regime, let's call it what it is, a chance. And there's a huge amount of hope that has been put in the allies that used to be allies in the old days, you know, the Gulf countries, Turkey, Jordan, as Ibrahim was saying, you know, that when the good times were good times, better times, you know, before the revolution, before the war. But to be honest, I don't know that there's a single plan that is logical and that works without any impediments regarding the economy. And I do not generally go into details because we have excellent economists, Syrian ones, who are dealing with that. But we understand that this has been the priority, to work on the banking sanctions. And once that is done, there's remittances that can come back into Syria, and there's millions of Syrians abroad who are waiting to participate as well, and the neighborhood to begin the reconstruction from the basic infrastructure to the homes.
Yeah, that's an issue I would very much like to revisit in the fall, because something needs to happen before the next winter, obviously, because it's a grim prospect. I'd love to work with the global centers to do something specifically on the matter of economic reconstruction. Aydin, you've been very patient. I know you were like eager to get in on the issues that Ibrahim was raising about the geopolitical scene, but also this question we have on the sidebar, which is, can we talk about reconciliation or peace building initiatives if they exist? What is the risk of a resurgence of violence? It seems that we've bracketed that prospect. We're already moved on from there. Is that realistic to be making that assumption?
Reconciliation in general in Syria? Or
yes, I think that is the burden of the question.
The reason why I was trying to chip in was to add two footnotes. First, to Ibrahim. Today, the Jordanian chief of joint staff is being hosted by his Turkish counterpart in Ankara. Just to tell you a kind of renewed and closer cooperation between Jordan and Turkey on probably security issues, military issues. The other thing is for Reem to add to the bleak picture that you drew about Syria today, is also that there is a terrible drought this year. So Syrian agricultural lands depend on rainfall.
Yes.
That's only 20% of it are irrigated. And also with this drought, with the climate change and whatnot, so the situation will be not so really, brilliant for the coming months. But perhaps the alternative, what happened in the past, in this last decade, was so terrible that anything is better than that. That I think, I don't know, maybe it's just a barroom sort of psychiatry that I'm trying to implement here, but I believe that is the dominant feeling. For reconciliation, well, so the main two actors appear to be because there are two administrations. One is the autonomous administration of North and East, not Northeast, but North and East Syria, that is the east of Euphrates. The Americans are about to pull out. So the Kurds are only half of the SDF. The remaining bit, YPJ, wants now that the PKK is out of the picture. So are they going to find a new way? Are they going to send the non-Syrian fighters back? If the non-Syrian fighters belonging to SDF are pushed out of Syria, then Ahmed al-Shara himself, to appease them, invited or appointed his own, non-Syrian fighters like Chechens, Uzbeks, and others to different positions. Although, yes, his closer confidants for intelligence and security matters are from the HTS and are from his Idlib years, but the others, so that will be a kind of a antagonism there, I mean, a contradiction there. On the other hand, whether it is going to go towards pluralism and autonomy, or is it too early to talk about that? Because the Druzi, for example, in the south, yes, they handle their own security, but they reached a kind of a fragile or temporary, whatever, they still found an understanding with Damascus. Whereas if the same is not allowed, for example, for the Kurds in the east of Euphrates, that will be another sticking point. So there is a lot to be done. And then the presence of Israel, of course, on the Golan Heights, like I guess it was Ibrahim who pointed out that the buffer zone of the buffer zone and whatnot. And the Turkish presence in the north for different reasons, which is, like I said, about to be sort of legalized by signing a defense pact, I understand, with the new Syrian government in place. So there is a lot to be done, many institutions to be rebuilt. But the good news is that with the lifting of sanctions of first the US and then the EU, and the payment of the Syrian debt by Saudi Arabia and Qatar to World Bank, now hundreds of billions of US dollars would be, released to be to be used for the good of Syrians. And mainly, so they are going to be most probably, I understand, used in Aleppo, Hamas, Hama, Humus, Damascus, and the coast, the Mediterranean coast, and the remaining. I don't know how it's going to work out, but it will be a long and hard process, and it can go still either way.
Thank you so much for that perspective. We have a question from Mr. Azar in the Q&A, which is about the issue of the Syrian-Israeli relationship, which has been mentioned a couple of times. The question simply is, how do you see the future of the Syrian-Israeli relationship? Can one meaningfully speculate about that at this stage? Mr. Azar asked whether either Reem or Ibrahim would like to come in on this. And it is surely a fascinating development to have emerged, the further expansion of Israel's influence. Do we see Israel as a winner in this from these developments? Perhaps through this weakening of the Iran relationship, but the consolidation of a Syrian state, is that that's something that presumably Israel could remove from its checklist for the last since 2011. I'm curious whether either of you want to come in on this. Reem or Ibrahim.
If Ibrahim doesn't want to go, I'll have a quick response to that. I think it's a good time to remind all of us and our audience that talks between Syria and Israel have been going on for decades. This is nothing new. What is new, however, is the progress that has been made at this stage between Israel and several countries in the region, including the UAE and Bahrain, and of course we have peace treaties with Jordan and with Egypt that goes back a long time. I think that Israelis and the American, the Trump administration, all administrations are very cognizant of the fact that Saudi Arabia has always said it would be the last Arab country to sign a deal with Israel, and it would not do so until a Palestinian state was recognized and was created. Since we are nowhere near there, I do think that it is in the interest of the region for Israel and Syria to reach, if not a peace treaty. I find it hard to believe that Ahmed Sharaa could right now enter the Abraham Accords as things stand, specifically because of the reaction of the Israelis when the Assad regime fell. So if I can rewind a little bit to that, I can give you a lot of reactions from the so-called Syrian street is that the 500 sorties and the airstrikes that Israel conducted in the 2 days and 2 nights after Assad fell, so until December 10th, 2024, merely seemed to confirm to the Syrian population that Israel wanted Assad to remain all the way. And this is not just conjecture. This is not just street analysis. This has been repeatedly either leaked or declared by officials in the Trump administration, that until the very last minute, Netanyahu was asking the US to not remove sanctions from Syria. So I think the Israelis are pushing for an agreement where Syria would be once more neutralized, not because of the Iranian presence, not because of any other reason, but because precisely it is now tied in to an agreement that is a regional one and an international one with the US. I frankly don't see that happening. However, Ahmed al-Sharaa knows that there's a price to pay for the removal of sanctions, for the recognition by the Trump administration, for the removal of his name from the wanted list and from the terrorism list. So there will be a price to pay, but it's not as big a deal as I think we might imagine. I don't think it is full peace accord in the way that we saw with Egypt and Jordan.
Can I just out of my curiosity, but I imagine also on the part of our listeners, does the Palestinian issue, Gaza, how does that feature in, as you've referred to it, the Syrian street quote unquotes reaction to these speculations about a relationship with Israel? Is this a source of indignation, outrage? Does this pose some kind of block? Because the conventional wisdom, I think, is that the Emiratis, even the Saudis, are actually quite constrained in their relationship with Israel by their fear of the reaction of popular opinion given the Israel's violence in Gaza.
I will just say 1 or 2 words so that Ibrahim and Aiden can pipe in as well. I think that on the Syrian street level, and by the way, whether it was pro-regime people or pro-revolution people, there's a great sense of solidarity with Gaza in particular, and there's a sense that this is what you get when you let impunity take over. Just as the Syrians, from their perspective, from our perspective, we have had dozens of Gazas over the years, the sieges, the relentless bombing, and etc., and the abandonment by international community. So I think that the Syrian population is very much in solidarity with the Gazans, which is why also Ahmed Sharaa would probably take that into consideration.
I want, before Ibrahim, you respond, can we add the Americans into the picture? We have 5 minutes on our clock, and I feel we'd be doing our audience a disservice if we didn't also bring the question of the Trump administration's moves, because when we speak about Israel, we're also to a degree talking about America. How do you see this configuration playing out? I know from our pre-conversations that it's on your mind.
Sure. Very brief and quick points, and probably this is my last intervention. On the US, I think the US is clearly moving towards more of allowing the region for burden sharing, which is not only Trump or not only Republican. This is something that we've seen over the last 3 administrations in the United States, and they do want clearly regional powers to take the lead on that, while they serve their national interest of keeping Iran out, keeping Russia in Syria weak, and ideally also out. But I don't think they would mind having some Russian presence as long as it's not the leading presence. And third, Israel. And on Israel here, I do think that the majority of Syrians are open to peace with Israel, not because they do not sympathize with Palestinians. They sympathize deeply with them, but they hate war as well. And they know that for them to be at war with Israel, that does not help Palestinians in any way. So both of them, these 2 factors, they both exist on them. Sympathy with Palestinians, but also war avoidant, because they've lived the war and there's nothing romantic about a war. I also agree with Reem. I think when we talk about peace, it's an opposite to war, which doesn't necessarily mean normalization the way the Emiratis did it. But it's probably at least a cold peace to avoid war in the future. Another point on this issue, I think it's important strategically for Syria not to enter Abraham Accords before Saudi Arabia does, because this would weaken the Saudi position on the Arab Peace Initiative. Syria should diffuse any tension with Israel, but should keep that strategic vision in their mind for the Palestinians, and to get something for the Palestinians, to work with this in coordination with Saudi Arabia. And here, last point, I just want to also highlight on all of that something internal, the factor of hope. So many issues in Syria, it's against the odds for Syria probably to survive, except we have hope. And this is not only an emotional thing, this is a real catalyst in geopolitics as well. When there is a strong will for a nation to rebuild, it's something very important and decisive. And Syrians now do have that. They do feel that they've got a chance once in probably 2 or 3 generations, and they do want to take that. They don't want to let this opportunity slip away from them.
Aydin, I see you nodding your assent to that, and if you don't mind, I will take that final statement from Ibrahim, which is, I think, a very powerful statement, given the weight of what we're talking about, as our concluding point for today's panel. It's been an honor, really, a privilege to be able to chair this meeting as a rank outsider to this field, to learn so much from our wonderful panel about an issue with the weight that Syria has and ought to have, really, in our understanding of global affairs. And Ibrahim's appeal to hope as a real force in the world, I think, is a very powerful one, and not just in the Syrian context. So I really appreciate very much the contributions we've had. I wish we had even more time to go deeper into this. I hope very much that, thanks to the cooperation between CGT in New York and the global centers in Amman and Istanbul, that we'll be able to continue these conversations. They've been extremely valuable, and I want to thank everyone for their contribution. The only sad thing about Zoom is the weird way in which you have to say goodbye, the flat way that we just click off the screen after such a fascinating conversation, which definitely deserves a shake of hands and a cup of tea or something stronger. But this is the way the world works now. It's been wonderful that we were able to come together. Wishing you all a good summer and health and safety over that time, and looking forward to many more conversations around these themes in the months to come. Bye bye to you all from CGT side. Thank you all. Bye.